I hate to say this, but this is my favorite tape measure.
You have a construction eraser.
Yeah, no, I don't have a top of my tape measure. Many mistakes as I make.
Take it back to Menards and say, hey,
this thing wore out, man. Going in and out of my bag, this thing wore out. All right. Alright guys, welcome back to the show. Today is going to be all about preparing your columns. But before we get started, if you want to design a barndominium, shop, garage, reach out to us, design at Mr. Postframe. We can help you out designing that. Also, we have a self-build Patreon group, which is a group for self-builders where we cover different topics every month. We do lives. It's awesome. It's a great community of other self-builders. Well, let's go ahead and jump into the show. Alright guys, so before we start cutting and preparing our columns, we have to shoot grade on all of our Pier brackets. So what we use to do that is a Stabila LAR 350. That is the rotary laser that we have chosen to use. I love it. It's durable and it's very accurate. So the first step is to go around with your grade stick and see which column is the highest. You want to locate the highest column, and the reason for that is if you find the highest one, you know that every other column is either going to be equal to that, or it's going to you're going to have to add a little to the bottom to get it to grade, which we will show you that when we're and explain that a little bit more when we're preparing our columns. That helps in a couple ways. One, it helps you to reduce errors because you know on every single bracket it should say plus and then a number, or 0 if it's at 0. And then you're not trying to say, oh, this one needs to be shorter. They're all going to be longer other than the ones that are 0. And secondly, it helps when you put your grade board on. That way your one that's marked 0, your grade board goes all the way down to the pier. And then the piers on the next ones aren't going to interfere with your grade board. So we have located the highest one. So we go around, hit each one. I usually will take a stick as I go, and I'll keep moving it to the highest one until I'm done and I have found that highest one, which is right here. So you can see on the side we have marked 0. I think there was one other one that was at 0. So this is the highest pier out of all of them. So I've gone around, found the highest one. Now I'm going to reset this to 0. So you can hear that's a solid tone, which means this is zeroed out with the laser. So if you notice, if I loosen this, take this down, you can see the arrow is pointing up, saying that I need to move this up to get to 0, and it's slow beeps. If I go up higher than 0, it's fast beeps, and the arrow's pointing down, telling me how far I need to go down to get to 0. So if I take that back to 0, lock it in, now I go around to each bracket, make sure my bubble is centered in the circle. That's important. And then I'm going to mark how much I have to add to that bracket, and I will write it on the side, and then I'll explain to you what we do with that number. So I'm going to make sure my circle or my bubble is in the circle, and it says plus. It's pointing up, so that means plus, and then it's 1/4 inch. So I write plus 1/4 on the bracket. We'll go around and do that to all. Now I know when I am preparing this column, I need to add 1/4 inch to the bottom of the column to get it to where it is at grade. So my starting point of my storyboard, my grade board is all perfectly level all the way around this building, and we will go into more detail when we are making our storyboard and marking on our columns. So these are the garage door locations, so we really don't have a bracket to write them on. However, I will lay this bracket out. I'll write it both on the pier and the bracket. Right. Plus 5/16. Plus 5/16. Five-eighths. One of the first things you need to know is what is the heel height of your truss. The heel height of your truss is from the bottom cord up to the top cord at the end, which I already know these are 15 inches. You can see I have a 15-inch heel height, which is something I will use as a minimum for any build that is not spray foaming the roof in and gonna put a blow-in insulation. The reason we do a 15-inch heel is so we can get the required R value all the way out to the outside wall. So that's one thing you need to know. Second thing you need to know is the thickness of your insulation, which we're using 2-inch insulation under our slab, and we're gonna have a 5-inch slab. So those are the three pieces of information I need to know to start my storyboard. So we'll go over here and we'll mark it out. Since I know I have 2 inches of insulation, that's gonna be my first mark. And I mark this on my template so that I know what I'm doing. It just kind of gives me confirmation that I'm doing things right. So first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna go to the end. In this case, we have 19-foot sidewalls. So I have a 20-foot 2x4, which is probably gonna come up a little bit short for the top of my truss, but we'll deal with that in a second. I'm gonna start at the bottom. I'm gonna mark 2 inches. That is my insulation. So I'll write on here insulation. And then from there, I'm gonna mark 5 inches. And that is the thickness of my concrete. So I'm gonna write 5-inch slab. So if you're gonna have a 6-inch slab, you would mark 6 inches from this line. So now that we have this, this is our finished grade for the inside concrete. So from there, I can now measure up 37 inches, and that's gonna be the center of my wainscot board. So you can either hook, add 7 to 35 or 37, or so you don't have to think too much, just put your tape on there, mark 37 inches. And the reason I'm marking 37 instead of 36 is because our square base is 1 inch, and then our steel starts. So there's the center of my wainscot board right there. So what I do is half of 5.5 is 2 3/4. So I'll put 2 3/4 on that. 5.5, 0. And that's my wainscot board. Now from here all the way up, I'm 2 foot on center. So you can measure from this line 2 foot on center, or this line 2 foot on center. It doesn't matter. It's just gonna be, depends on whether you want to mark the bottom of your board or the top. One thing you can do, which I just got rid of my nails, is you can put a nail here or a screw to hold your tape measure. So now that I marked those, I'm just going to go ahead, mark a line through it. So then all of my boards will go on top. So one thing that we do on all of our buildings is we shoot for halfway between the wainscot girt and our finished floor. We'll put a 2x4 girt, and the main purpose of that is for electrical box installs, you have something solid to attach to. For water spigots, you have something solid to attach to. It gives the wainscot one more point of contact where you can screw it in. But another thing this does is we use a lot of 3x5 windows, and I know that the bottom of my window sits at 22 inches. So I make this wainscot board be the bottom support of our windows, so I don't have to add an extra board in after we frame and cut out our windows. So this I typically used to leave this out all the time, but the guys like it to be marked so that it's already marked on the column, so when they put it up it's easy for them to do it and they don't really have to think about it, which is a good idea. That's the whole point of this. So this will be on all of our plans, this 2x4 girt, and you can kind of modify its location based on the size of your windows. For example, this build's going to have 22 3x5 windows, so it makes sense for us to make this in a spot where it's going to be more useful and we have to use less lumber to frame out the bottoms and tops of our windows. I have a 19-foot sidewall, so I know from my finished concrete to the bottom of my truss is going to be 19 feet. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hook over the end of the board and just go up 19 feet 7 inches, because I got 2 inches of insulation, 5 inches concrete, and I'm going to mark where the heel of my truss is going to sit. So this board is going to end up being a little bit short. So what we'll do is once we transfer these marks onto here, I'll just measure up 15 inches and mark the column. So I'll write 15-inch heel. So from this line up is 15 inches. And then this last girt, it's going to be your FJ nailer. We're gonna wait to put that on. At least I like to wait to put it on until I actually get the wall up, because depending on your overhang length, the pitch of your roof will depend on exactly where you need that FJ nailer to sit. So I always wait. You can put it on before if you want to try to figure all that out, you can. I choose to wait. This is gonna be our 0 right here. So we have 0 here. So I know when I make this column, I do not have to add anything to the bottom of it to get it up to grade. So if we go over here and look at this one, it says plus 5/16. So what that means is this bracket sits 5/16 inches lower than that one. So what we need to do is we need to add 5/16 of an inch to the bottom of our column so that our starting point will be exactly the same as the one at 0. That way when you run all your girts and all that, they're nice and level. When you set your trusses, they're perfectly level. So we'll pick one of the first sidewall columns, see what the measurement is, and then I'll show you how I mark that on the actual column itself. I always start with my sidewall columns because we build those walls first. This is the first one here. It has a plus 3/8, so I need to add 3/8 to this column. So we're going to go over here to the columns and I'm going to show you how you can mark them out. So these are all our sidewall columns, and if you can see, this board right here is meant to come out. And depending on how you get your columns will vary a little bit. What I'm going to do in this situation, since these boards aren't that long, I have plenty of room from that point up to here to get my 15-inch heel. And I have plenty of room that way to get all my measurements in. So I'm going to make this point right here the heel of my truss. So what that means I'm gonna take this crooked 2x4. I'm gonna line that up right at that point because I'm gonna take this board out right here. And that's where the heel of my truss is gonna sit. And now I'm gonna go down and I'm gonna transfer all my marks from this template or storyboard, whatever you wanna call it, to my column. Then at the bottom, I'm gonna add 3/8 of an inch. So this is the bottom right here. So I'm gonna make a line. And then I need to add 3/8 of an inch. So we put our tape out here, line an even number up on that, add 3/8. That's where I'm gonna cut this column right there. A lot of times, if I can, I like to just line this board up with the end. And so if you're gonna do that, depending on how long that board is that's left loose, you can just line your storyboard up at the end. If it's a 0, if you need to add 3/8, make a 3/8 mark, and then butt your storyboard up like that. One nice thing about this is when I make this cut, I'm gonna square off the bottom of this column really nice, and it's gonna sit really well. A lot of times when you get these columns, they're not exactly square on the bottom, so sometimes you have to square them up anyway. So we'll go ahead, get this one out on some sawhorses, finish marking it, and we'll show you how we cut it and take the notch out. All right, so one thing I want to show you when you're doing it this way, we're going to cut some off the bottom. I will mark score line all the way across the bottom. That's my 0. This space right here is the 3/8 of an inch that I added. So this is going to be my cut line right there. Then when I put my grade board on, it's going to get lined up with that mark right there. Then it will be level all the way around the building. This portion right here is just what I had to add on to get this column up to where it was level with this pier that we marked at 0. So right here, this block that we're going to take out is the heel of the truss. So that's where the heel of the truss is going to sit. So being that my 2x4 isn't long enough, I don't need 22-foot 2x4s on this job, so I'm not going to get them. I know that is my heel. I have a 15-inch heel, so I'm going to butt that in there. Going to go up 15 inches. And I'm going to make my mark, and that's where I cut this off up here. So I'm going to mark it, and then I'm going to write cut. This is for us guys that aren't that smart and need to be told what to do. So now the next step is I'm going to remove this block in here. So there's usually a couple nails tacked in there, or screws. They were nice enough to put screws in here for us. So I'll have to remove those 2 screws. This will drop out. We'll leave it out and we'll cut this off, and then this will be ready up here. When you order your columns, make sure you specify that you want one of the center plies left loose. If you don't, they will nail them together. So it's not impossible to get it apart and cut it out, because I've had to do that. But tell them to leave one of the center plies loose and your life will be much easier. Now we have created a pocket for our truss to sit in. So this is where our truss pocket will be. We'll cut this off. That'll be the top of the top cord of the truss. And we're ready to go with this column once we cut this off and cut our bottom off. So to cut the bottom, you want a nice square cut. So if you don't have a big saw, like that. You're just gonna have to make 4 cuts with a regular size circular saw and then finish it off with a hand saw or sawzall. Or the top ones, it doesn't matter. I've cut those with a chainsaw, cut them with circular saw, whatever. But the bigger saw does make it nice. So now that we got this all marked and prepared, we'll set it in the bracket and show you how we hook it up. All right, so now to make sure that when we start building our walls on the ground, all the girts are fairly straight, we're gonna set this into the bracket, and then we're gonna line this line up here with the edge of our bracket, and then we're just gonna hold it in place with a couple screws. And this is while we build our walls, so all of our girts will be in a line. I need to move the top of the post that way. Another thing that makes this nice is I can get it pretty square by looking at this line. I can see this line sticks out this way a little bit. So if I go and shift the top that way, it'll be pretty square. You want to tell me when to go?
Yep.
Needs to come my way. More?
Touch. Yep.
So I make my 8-foot center marks in my concrete. So what I'll do is just like on a 4-ply, I'll just line the center ply up with that. Then I know I'm pretty good on my 8-foot on center. All right, so a couple things before we close this out. I like to build my walls on the inside. One, because you're working on the gravel, so if it rains, it's not getting muddy. Two, you can't really put your column out the other way and be able to see your marks. You can, it's just a lot more, it's just a little bit goofier. You'd have to kind of line the heel of the truss up with the bracket. So I like building them on the inside of the wall. That's one reason I like to have my pad ready to rock and roll when we start building, because it's nice and level, and you want this wall to sit as level across here as you can. So sometimes you might have to add a block under the end of your columns. We'll build this whole wall on the ground, make sure that the bottom and top are both 80 feet long before we put it up. Then all we have to do when we stand sections is butt the girts up, and then we know we're going to have a wall that is equal size on the top and bottom. That allows us to properly square and plumb it as well. One thing to think about, depending on whether you have a 3-ply or 4-ply column. In this case, we're using 4-ply columns. So obviously we can't get our truss exactly in the middle. So if I'm taking the second one out from this end wall, so going forward, I will make sure that the columns are the same, that the second ply is the one I'm taking out, and then most importantly, the one on the opposite side needs to have the same ply taken out, or your truss will be slightly at an angle, which will mess you up when you're putting your purlins up. I know 1.5 inches doesn't seem like a lot, but it will cause you fits if you're trying to line up a line and your column's sitting 1.5 inches, or your truss is sitting 1.5 inches further down the wall than the opposite side. You're gonna have trouble. So with a 3-ply, you really don't have to worry about that. You're taking out the center ply, so there's really not a lot of thought that has to go into it. But when you're using 4-plies, keep that in mind, that you want to stay consistent all the way down your wall, and most importantly, stay consistent across from the column, that the same ply is taken out. A couple more things to think about, is you needed anything else to think about. Your corner column will get marked the exact same way, except you will not notch it. You will mark the heel location, mark up your 15 inches or whatever your heel height is, cut it off, and then put it in place. You will not notch it, because your end truss gets nailed into all of the end wall columns. It gets face nailed, so then it will be even with all of your girts going down. We're going to show you how we figure and mark out our end columns. On our buildings, we run the end columns all the way up to the top chord of the truss. That gives your building a lot of added strength. So I have my 8-foot center mark right here. So I know from the end I'm 8 feet. I have a 5/12 roof pitch. So for every 1 foot of run, I'm rising 5 inches. So I would take 8 feet times 5, that's 40 inches. So above, I need to mark this column 40 inches above that 15-inch heel height mark on my end column. And so you have to do that math all the way across. So we'll go over here and kind of just show you that on the column. So in this situation with the end columns where you're not notching or anything, we'll just square off the end of the column and start our marks from there. So in this case, we have to add 5/16. So we'll square off the bottom, make a 5/16 inch mark, and that's where our storyboard starts.
Right there.
Right there? So in this case, this whole column is going to get marked out the same. I'm going to mark the bottom of my heel location, and then I'll show you once these guys are done marking the rest. So this is the heel of our truss right here. We'll mark up 15 inches. And typically your storyboard is going to be long enough. This house just has 19-foot sidewalls, and we don't have any boards longer than 20 feet. So that's the top of the truss right there. So I'm going to measure 40 inches up from there, because 8 times 5 is 40 inches. So I'm going to mark right there. I always go ahead and make a line, and that 8 foot is in the center of this truss. So let's see, we are going to, this is going to be the outside. So if that's the outside, I got to think about this, which way my angle needs to go. So it's going to be up like this, so I need to angle up like that. Correct?
Yeah.
So I'm going to make sure, I'm going to set my square at 5/12, make sure you're using the common, and I'm going to make sure it intersects at the center of that mark, because that's where the actual 8 foot is on this column. And then that's where we're going to cut it off, right there. Alright, so that's going to be a wrap on today's video. Keep in mind, guys, if you need any brackets, perma columns, anything like that for your building, reach out to us. We can help you out with that. You just send us an email, design a Mr. Post Frame, with your plans or what you need, and we can get you a quote back. But we appreciate you guys as always. If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button, share us with your friends, and we'll catch you on the next video.